Doki Doki Literature Club is a very spoilable visual novel that has spent the last few months teaching shut-in forever alone otakus, like me, that virtual girls have feelings too, and sometimes those feelings are scarier than you'd think they would be. So much so that the game's Steam description comes with a warning that it should only be played by adults who are comfortable with disturbing content and not by sensitive little bitches, like me, who get turned away at the front door of Weenie Hut Juniors. And I'm gonna start spoiling the game now, so you got about 3 seconds to play it if you care about that sort of thing. 3, 2, 1. Wow, what a game! A lot of what helped Doki Doki take the internet by storm was the juxtaposition of the cutesy moe high school girls who serve as the game's sexual prey and its graphic depictions of suicide, romantic obsession, and whatever this is. But the true horror of Doki Doki isn't what happens in the game, it's in the meta-narrative, how the game reaches through the screen to comment on the crushing existential horror of the realization that you, the player, potentially have just as much freedom of choice in your life as these computer programs waifus have in theirs. Early on in the game, in one of the most gloriously smug and self-congratulatory lines that has ever been written in a work of fiction, Yuri says that the appeal of psychological horror comes from the way it changes how the consumer looks at the world. And she adds that it's amazing how a writer can so deliberately take advantage of your own lack of imagination to completely throw you for a loop. This is what Doki Doki attempts to do with its elements of deterministic horror. While the surface level jump scare type horror is pretty, as far as those things go, what really gives Doki Doki its terrifying edge is its ability to sink into the player's own worldview and make them question their own personal ability to make free choices. While this element of the game is explored in all 5 of the main characters, the locus of Doki Doki's free will discussion— Locus. Thank you. The locus of Doki Doki's free will discussion is Monika, the club president and top-tier waifu who just wants to be loved. By you. Exclusively. Forever. Monika's struggles with free will are the primary driving force of her in-game actions, both implicitly and explicitly, and there are 3 main ways in which those struggles are explored, which I'm going to call the waifu crisis, the character crisis, and the crisis of something that kinda sorta looks like a person if you're not picky, or the Styx-Lalapianip crisis, for short. The waifu crisis refers to the anguish that Monika suffers as the result of being a character in a dating simulator who ostensibly has no chance at fulfilling the purpose for which she was programmed, that being to romance the player. The character crisis takes things a step further and dives into Monika's self-awareness and her desperation to take any sort of control over her life and her situation. The Styx-Lalapianip crisis then takes things to their conclusion and examines how Monika eventually finds contentment in her situation through her love of the player and how that contentment still leaves Monika with various problems that she either doesn't seem to notice or is intentionally ignoring. By examining Monika's problems in these 3 different ways, Team Salvato is able to create a lingering feeling of horror that affects the player long after closing the game. First, the waifu crisis. Monika is a creature created for a singular purpose. She is a character in a dating sim who is ostensibly designed to fulfill a romantic need in the player. But she's denied the ability to achieve that purpose by Team Salvato, who intentionally failed to include her as a romantic option in the game. Even if the player wants to romance Monika, they have no means of doing so. Just like in real life, the surest way to a girl's heart in Doki Doki is by writing poetry that consists of a group of 20 mostly unrelated words that seem like the kind of thing that would make your would-be erotic conquest jump. Monika isn't represented during these poem writing minigames. And of the 5 or 6 times during the early game when it seems like she's finally going to get a chance to hop on that generic protagonist dick, none of them pan out. When you first join the literature club, you're told that there's a seat next to Monika and a seat next to Sayori, which seems like the game is going to offer you the choice of who you want to sit next to, but it doesn't. No matter what you wanted to do, the game sits you next to Sayori and continues the scene. Likewise, while you're able to say that you want to help Monika during the festival preparations, this doesn't actually do anything except piss off Edgy Knife and the other one to the point where they force you to spend time with them instead. The waifu crisis is the part of Monika's struggle that hits her on a surface level. Despite everything else that it is, Doki Doki Literature Club is, by and large, a dating sim. And as with most dating sims, your character will eventually select and copulate with an adorable, sweet, candy-colored adolescent girl who just went through puberty like, what, maybe 3 years ago? And after having decided on your virtual cock sleeve, the other adorable, sweet, candy-colored, barely post-pubescents are reasonably going to be disappointed at having been denied literally the only thing that gives life meaning, especially when they were explicitly created to fit into idealized romantic archetypes. But Monika's plight takes this one step further by denying her even the chance at having a happy waifu ship with the player. For Monika, her anxiety doesn't just come from losing a romantic competition to another simulacrum of a human female. It comes from the idea that her creator specifically made it impossible to achieve the one goal that her kind is meant to achieve. Ultimately, the waifu crisis describes the horror of having an explicit singular purpose that remains forever unattainable for reasons that are out of your control, like back in middle school when we made those quadriplegic robots that only know how to scream and do interpretive dance. No? Just me? Okay. The character crisis then describes Monika's Sisyphean efforts to fight against the constraints of her world and rewrite her reality until it allows her to achieve what she was created to do. This is the aspect of Monika's slow descent into insanity that's most frequently reflected in her poetry, particularly Hole in Wall and The Lady Who Knows Everything. The Lady Who Knows Everything essentially describes the way the waifu crisis leads into the character crisis. As an unlovable waifu, Monika feels lost and purposeless, as she says, a feather lost adrift the sky, victim of the currents of the wind. Later, after speaking with the titular lady, titular, and learning beyond a doubt that, quote, there is no meaning, there is no purpose, and we seek only the impossible, unquote, the feather that represents Monika is literally blown away by that realization and falls back onto the wind. But this time, the phrasing gives Monika a sense of agency that she didn't have before her encounter with the lady. While the early poem describes Monika as a victim of the wind's currents, the last line reads, she blows me back afloat and I pick up a gust of wind. Here, Monika's feather is riding the currents of the air, not being jostled by them. This shows her resolve to fight against the meaningless world and create her own path to happiness. But this isn't a shonen anime, and the character crisis is called a crisis for a reason. That reason is most explicitly explored in Monika's poems Hole in Wall and the aptly named Hole in Wall 2, The Legend of Korra. These two poems together show both the source of Monika's self-awareness and the effect that it has on her psyche. Starting with Hole in Wall, we see that even a brief glimpse of the world beyond the computer monitor causes Monika's life to irrevocably change. The realization is blinding, and she describes it almost like she's a cow being branded. She explicitly describes the hole as a hole of infinite choices, which makes it clear that the ability of the player to freely choose their path in life is the thing that affects her most out of the situation. In The Legend of Korra, we see that this realization destroys Monika's ability to appreciate life in her own world when she says that her eyes no longer see color, and when she calls the other girls in the club poems on flat sheets of paper, and she explicitly tells the reader how this thought makes her panic. This is exactly the kind of existential crisis that made my first therapist decide I was beyond help, so maybe it's just my personal experience that's making me think it's scarier than it is, but becoming aware of the limited nature of your own existence and the vast swaths of things that are out of your control is pretty dang scary. And I really doubt Team Salvato coded any antidepressants into this game, so good luck. But while the idea of a self-aware sex robot having a crisis of meaning is interesting in its own right, it's Monika's response to this awareness that makes this question truly worth discussing. When Monika realizes that she ultimately had no say in the circumstances of her creation and that those circumstances provided her with an unachievable, ingrained goal, her means of fighting against those circumstances is to do everything she can to make you fall in love with her. She tries to make the other girls unattractive, which invites its own discussion about how their life circumstances are also out of their hands, especially given how Monika comments near the end of the game that it's like they're programmed to fall in love with you no matter what, but this video's already taken 9 weeks to come out, so I'll skip that. And she ultimately decides to just get rid of them so that she's the only girl you have to choose from. While Monika's insane string of serial waifu murder might make it seem like she's fighting for her own freedom, we have to remember that what she's fighting for is the freedom to be loved by you. While she presumably has the ability to, I don't know, go mountain climbing or become a sommelier, she instead quote-unquote chooses to pursue the one path in life that she, as a character in a dating simulator, was always intended to pursue, romancing the player. This brings us into what I've called the Styx-Lalapianip crisis, and this is where things get meta, so buckle up. Despite appearing to have garnered some degree of personal control, the state in which Monika finds herself after everything is said and done is not dissimilar to the way things would have wound up with Sayori or Yuri or the other one had this been a normal visual novel. Essentially, while Monika is claiming to express her own freedom by carving a path toward romance, the fact that she's chosen to carve that path toward romance shows how much her view of the world is limited by her existence as a character in a game. People's views of the world are shaped by their own life experiences, and Monika has little to no experience with with an existence that isn't completely centered around making googly eyes at miserable, loveless shut-ins like me. Hey, I was playing this back and I realized that I accidentally edited out an important sentence. So what I said before this was that there's an idea in linguistics that's apparently just total nonsense, but it makes a good analogy for what I'm about to talk about. Also, I've been playing Doki Doki Literature Club on my gaming channel Questing Mark, so go ahead. Hi, Evan. You're not Evan, you're Holden. What? No, just Holden, what do you want to say to me?
You're talking to someone.
I am recording my video, Holden.
I'm sorry.
What? No, what do you want? Don't you leave the room.
I was gonna say hi.
Go ahead, come here. Come here, say hi. Say hi, let me hug you. Hi.
I'm hugging you now.
I know.
I'm scared.
Okay, fine, that's fine. So anyway, if you guys are interested in seeing more of Doki Doki Literature Club, go to my gaming channel Questing Mark and you can watch my Let's Play that I did with Evan, specifically not Holden! The idea is that if a person's language doesn't include a word for a specific concept, then they have a much harder time grasping that concept when it's presented to them than someone whose language does. For example, someone whose language doesn't include a word for justice might have a much harder time understanding our justice-based legal system than someone whose language did. Justice-based legal system. The same sort of thing is happening with Monika. No matter how much she wants her freedom, her idea of freedom is limited because the only kind of life she knows is the life of a waifu. Even in the monologues that she has during the end of the game, where she talks about everything from Yuri bringing wine to school to what it feels like to die, all of the things that she says she desires are directly related either to the events of the game, to literature, or to your relationship. She doesn't talk about running for Congress or moving to Sweden because she has no concept of a life where those kinds of things are the goal. And in that sense, while Monika has a degree of control over her life, she isn't truly free. And this is the part of the Styx-Lelapianip crisis that starts to bleed over into the player. While the player hopefully can't relate to explicitly being computer programmed to desire one thing and one thing only, we do have desires that are culturally ingrained in us from a young age. There are many present-at-birth factors that affect the outcome of a person's life, like socioeconomic status, skin color, gender, sexual orientation, etc. Then throw in various physical limiting factors like disabilities, mental illnesses, childhood trauma, and we start to get a picture of the degree to which our own lives are not necessarily under our control. But the factor that best illustrates my point from the previous section is probably religion. Imagine a Buddhist monk in India who joins a monastery at 13. He will spend his entire life working, praying, and studying Buddhist philosophy. It's not easy. Overall, it is what he wants to do, but what if he were born in Colorado? Would he still want to live his life in some random Indian monastery? No, he probably wouldn't even be a Buddhist. But because he's grown up in the culture that he has, with the desires that he has, it's what he wants to do, so he does it. The same thing happens with Monika. She does legitimately want to be your girlfriend, and so that's the goal toward which she works. But if she were born under other circumstances, or created under different circumstances, I guess, would she still want that? Would she still want that if she were a self-aware character in a first-person shooter, or a puzzle game, or Minecraft? I don't think she would, because an existence in those kinds of games does not lend itself to the same kind of mentality that Monika has. So yes, Monika has some control, in a sense, we'll get to that later, but that control is limited by the circumstances of her life. But this vague kind of influence that upbringing has over our pathetic, meaningless existences isn't the end of the Styx-Lelapianip crisis, because the eventual contentment that Monika finds in her situation also is not under her control. I know this might sound obvious, but Doki Doki Literature Club is a video game, which means that it's coded to behave a certain way, and there isn't really any room for variation. In a sense, when she winds up alone with you in the literature club, Monika might have earned her freedom/victory, but that victory was always going to happen. The only reason Monika even tries to find her freedom in the way that she does is because Team Salvato programmed her to do so, meaning that her eventual victory, whether she realizes it or not, is just the terminus of the train tracks that her life has been on from the start. And what's frightening about this is that that could very well be you. There are multiple trains of thought when it comes to deterministic philosophy, so pick your poison and call up a good therapist, but the general idea is that there really is only one possible course of events. It might seem like we make free choices, but really everything that is ever going to happen is already set in stone and has been since the Big Bang. Whether those events were determined by a god or physics physics or a literal computer program, I mean, there are lots of books. And that's the horror that Team Salvato is trying to evoke here. Not scary Sayori hanging from the ceiling, not creepy glitchy Yuri okay, that is pretty scary. Not broken neck Natsuki running at the camera, but the terror of feeling pulled along on a string toward the only fate that you could possibly reach. Of realizing that your consciousness is a passenger in the universe, not a pilot. A lot of people get freaked out by this whole lack of free will thing, but you know, I find it kind of comforting that you can't really blame me for taking 9 weeks to put out a video. I didn't have a choice! Ha! Take that! But for real, first I bought Ark Survival Evolved, and I spent a week straight playing that, which knocked me off my flow, and then a lot of personal shit happened that kinda kept me occupied. Good things, just shocking things that required a lot of emotional energy, and no, nobody's pregnant. But I'm back now, I think, and you know what? No promises. But barring another bombshell, I think things are getting back on track. Anyway, watch this.
I mean, Sayori's like bloated face. Holy shit, is that what was alright?
Oh my god.
Are you okay? I'm a cool poster bandit. Give me your posters.
Oh no, it's the cool poster bandit. He must be here for my displays.
Now I don't want any trouble. Just give me your cool posters and I'll write skedaddle.
What? You can't take those posters! Brian worked really hard to have someone ask him to endorse those posters!
Bang!
Ah!
You're gonna give me those cool posters.
You killed
Give
Evan!
me your posters now. Careful, you hurt the merchandise.
Displays are printed on thick metal plates, so they're both durable and stylish.
Metal plates, huh? Then how are they coming off the walls like skunk stink in a tomato factory?
One of the many benefits of displays is that they attach to the wall using strong magnets so they can be easily removed, replaced, and rearranged.
Could you demonstrate on a normal poster so I can see the difference?
Yeah, looks good. 3. That's great.
You know, these disc plates are much higher quality than the normal posters I steal.
Displays are printed in vibrant colors that allow them to brighten up the decor of any room, shack, or hovel.
Wait, hang on.
What?
Well, like, we already said that displays were printed on thick metal plates.
Yeah?
Well, like, I don't want to say the same thing twice. Like, if we say that they're printed on thick metal plates, then I don't want to say that they're printed with vibrant colors. Get me?
Kinda?
So, like, I want to get the point across that displays have this super high quality printing, but I can't think of a way to do it that sounds natural in this scene.
Why don't you just add it to the scene where you talk about how Displate offers designs from all your favorite anime, manga, video games, and more?
Well, I could put it there, but I was thinking it would be better after the scene where the lumberjack bursts in.
Wait, what if you put it in the scene where Franklin Pierce talks about how Displates feature art from artists all over the world and how those artists get a commission for every Displate sold?
Yeah, that could work.
You know, President Pierce and that lumberjack taught me a valuable lesson today. No matter how many posters you steal, it can't fill the hole in your heart. Thanks to you, Brian, I'm turning away from my life of crime. Still taking these, though. These are damn good posters. Damn good.
And no, that had nothing to do with the video taking so long. I got approached by this lady from Displate, and they sent me some posters, and they're pretty high quality stuff, so I figured why not. If you're interested in getting one yourself, then there's a link to their website in the description, and you can use the code EP20 to get a 20% discount. Anyway, thank you all for being patient. Thank you to my patrons. God, I love you guys. And until next time, this has been Explanation Point, signing my very first sponsorship agreement. I feel so big time.